hour. But Mr. Calvin Beckett, who is from Boston, Massachusetts, is in Colombia for a month doing some studying. He's trying to learn Spanish. And so he's going to share with us some of the insights about theater in the ESL area. So, Mr. Beckett, welcome to Colombia. Bienvenido a Colombia. And tell us a little bit about your professional career and how you got to this point, and we'll go from there.
It's a pleasure being here, Ms. Dr. Johnson. I have a bachelor's degree in theater arts. I have a master's degree in dance education and a education degree, a master's in education degree. I began teaching ESL at a school called the Newcomer Academy, which was a brand new school designed for new immigrants coming to Boston who needed more help learning English before they went into their classrooms. And then from there, I figured out how to help theater teach them English even faster.
Okay. And the big secret about that was I opened that school. I was the director of that school, and I hired Mr. Beckett because his resume said, this is an interesting character, and he can help us a lot. And in fact, he has. I forget whether it's 4, 5, or 6 years he's been there, but he's done a lot of work. So we're going to talk about ESL and theater and how they come together. So what I thought we'd do is I'm going to ask Mr. Beckett questions, and what I'd like to do too is the audience, if you have a question about the topic that we're working on at this point, please send it along, and we can do it while the topic is in front of us and while it's hot and while we're working on it. So, Mr. Beckett, let me start off. My question is this: how can theater arts be so important for ESL students?
Well, first it teaches them how to speak on stage. It's a way of having them approach learning English that's first safe and then fun to do.
Okay, stop. Safe and fun. Why aren't other ESL classes safe and fun? And tell us about that.
In the traditional English ESL class, the teachers focus on reading and writing, which is wonderful. But in theater arts, the focus is on speaking and listening. And one of the things that the theater arts does is it's experiential. You have to participate in it in order for it to work. And I've developed a way of doing it that first and foremost makes it a group activity. And then in that group activity, people become safe because it's okay to make a mistake.
Okay, unlike the other English class where you stand up and say it and it's wrong, everybody sort of snickers.
Right, everyone snickers at you. But in theater, you practice. And that's the whole point, is to practice, practice, practice. And so the students learn that they are here to make the mistakes, and those mistakes are okay to make.
Okay, so then having it become fun
are the activities that I use.
Okay, so it's unlike looking at the book and pronouncing numbers 5, 6, and 7 and trying to stand.
No.
Got it. Okay, so that sounds great. But what about beginner students? And what you just said is that all your students came from other countries into the U.S. And didn't speak much English. Mm-hmm. So tell me and tell us about, because we have a lot of beginning students around the Andes regions, tell us about how you would work with beginning students to get them to become engaged in activities like this, having it be safe and fun.
Well, first with the beginner students, I don't push them to speak at all. I don't push them to speak until they're ready. So what they're doing is listening to the other students work on these exercises And as they're trying, you see them, they start to say it, hello, how are you? Very softly to themselves as they're hearing everyone else do it. So as they become more confident, and as they hear their fellow students pronouncing and saying these words and these tongue twisters, they then are able to get more confidence and begin to start to speak up and speak louder.
So let me say this and tell me whether it's right or wrong. So what happens in your classroom is you develop a community of learners, and so it's not just Eric standing out there saying something in English and putting his life on the line. It's everybody sort of participating.
And I teach them what I'm trying to get them to do, and teach it in such a way that they become owners of that learning, and they then impart that learning on each other. So one of my more advanced students will turn to that beginner student and give them help, whether they speak the same language or not.
Okay.
And give them help, give them encouragement to try to speak it.
And in the meantime, they can laugh about it.
They can laugh about it.
Okay.
And most of the time, the first person they laugh at is me.
Really?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, good. Okay, well, that's important. So then community is built, and you're working on listening and speaking as part of the real foundations of an ESL classroom. How is it different, however, from a standard ESL classroom?
Because it's participatory. If you look at it, can I move to one of my charts?
Sure.
Okay. So one of the things I use, one of the elements of theater that I use are vocal exercises. And in doing vocal exercises, the point for the actor is to warm up the articulators, prepare his or herself to actually speak in front of an audience so that that audience can hear everything that they say clearly.
Okay, so I'm going to stop here. So we've got an ESL class where kids are just saying words. And you're saying in a theater class, that's different because you want them as a long-term goal to be able to enunciate and, okay, can you say a little more about that?
I break down the language. So what I first start with vowel sounds. I start working with vowel sounds. So and I think we have one of the charts with the vowel sounds on it. But I try to make sure that the students start with the vowel sounds. We start understanding what their articulators are, their teeth, their lips, their tongue.
Okay, we're teachers, we're not actors. What are articulators?
Articulators are those parts of the face that allows us to produce speech. Like I said, the teeth, the lips, the tongue, the top of the mouth, and the bottom of the mouth.
Okay.
So I introduce them to those types of things. So we do silly exercises. Sippity, 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 sippity. Whippity, 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 whippity. Pippity, pippity, pippity. The fun starts happening. What they're realizing is they're now focusing on those articulators. So we do very quickly go through a vocal warm-up like that to prepare to speak. And then we move to doing vowel sounds. So long vowels, A, E, I, O, U. We have those vowel sounds and combined with the consonant sounds.
Okay. For all of us out there who don't remember that English is just flooded with vowel sounds. Long sounds, short sounds, diphthongs, blends. And it's really, really important that kids practice them and learn them, because otherwise you get these little muddled pieces of words that sometimes are not comprehensible. And I say when I'm speaking to my audience is, look, you're going to have an accent. Accents happen. It's like, I don't care. But when accents get interrupted interrupt comprehension, then it becomes a really big problem because you don't understand what the speaker's trying to say. And so I think here what Calvin is doing is breaking down those particular sounds in English that we as teachers may take for granted, but they as actors and theater people won't take for granted, because at the other end of the theater program is production and presentation, and you don't want somebody up there muffing up the language, so you start them young.
You're tuning their ear to the sound of English. And that's how I make sure they think about it. They're tuning their ear. It's about, at the very beginning, it's just simply about figuring out the sounds. So with the vocal exercises, looking at the short vowel chart, I would have in my room a chart where there would be the consonant sounds and the consonant blends on one side, and then the vowels in the middle.
Let's see if our folks can cue up the short vowel charts. Okay, so what list made a chart with consonants down one side, the 5 short vowels in the next column. And so explain to us what that is, because I'm trying to make words out of it. I'm not getting words.
It's not about words, it's about the sounds. Perfect, that was it. It's about the sounds. You're tuning your ear to the sounds. And even English speakers themselves make those mistakes in the proper vowel sounds and pronunciation. So I'm helping the kids figure out how to say those sounds. So we can look at our chart. These are the short vowel sounds.
And it's up on the camera.
Good. So ah as in bat, ah. As in bet, as in bit, O as in bot, and So a, e, a. I taught elementary school. I know all about this, believe me. Okay, so what are you doing? This is an activity where the entire class is repeating what I'm saying. So I would say, repeat, ba, be, bo, ba, and the whole class would say ba, be, ba, ba. And
so we're not comprehending this, we're just listening to it.
Just listening and repeating, tuning our ears.
Be, ba, ba. Okay.
Ba. Yes. And then, so I have V, C, CH in the ch sound, because that's a very common sound in English. So I want them to be able to recognize that sound. So cha, che, chi, cha, cha. So they would pronounce that.
Got it.
And it will be, we call it in English a chorus. So it would be the entire class repeating those consonant and vowel sounds together.
Now, what about Eric in the back that's not getting it?
Well, it's repeated. It's repeated. So it's something that's done every day. It's not just thrown to the side for one lesson. It's something that they're repeating every day.
Okay.
So it's part of what we do as a class.
All right. So how do you, in a class of X number of students, manage each one of those kids? Because the other piece that we didn't really talk about is that at Newcomers there were kids from 20 different countries and maybe 19 different language groups. So you're dealing with all these different accents and sound productions and things like that. So in your class, how did you deal with all of these kids?
Well, I was constantly moving. And I would maybe have them, I would move around as they're chanting. As they're chanting, I'm listening to them. I'm moving through the classroom listening to see who was pronouncing the vowels correctly, who is a little nervous about saying and speaking out loud, and who is actually making a mistake in the production of the sound. And I will stop, and I won't point out anyone particular, but I'll say, oh, say that again. Ba, be, I would ask them to say it again and have the entire class repeat it again. or I would focus on one vowel sound. So if the sound is coming out I will make sure that they understand what that difference is by saying it and having them repeat it.
Okay.
And they go through the entire alphabet.
How long do you do this? With how many letters? In what part of the day? Because I'm thinking if I had to do this for 2 hours every day, I'd be like,
No. At the beginning, it takes time. You're actually teaching them what you want them to do, how you want them to perform the task itself, and then have them working on listening to themselves speak and working on making sure the articulators are working correctly. So the first time I introduce this, it probably takes about a half hour.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes 45 minutes, depending on how many beginning learners there are in the class.
Okay.
And so what ends up happening is after about 5 or 6 classes or lessons of me going through this, the students can go through it like a chant.
Okay.
And it takes no time at all to get through the vowel charts.
And we're remembering here, as listening to Mr. Beckett, that the goals are long-term, the ability to speak and enunciate clearly, and not particularly be on stage, but have the presence and the persona to do that, correct?
In theater, you practice. In theater, you practice without an audience in front of you. And you begin very slowly, you build on everything that you're learning. So each time you perform, you're learning something new. You're figuring out a new little quirk in terms of how you actually speak. So the kids in my classes learn more about how they produce the sound more than someone from a class that does not do this.
Okay, so I'm going to move us along here because the next one is the next activity Calvin's going to talk about, Mr. Beckett's going to talk about, are tongue twisters. And you don't need to go very far to tongue twist a native Spanish speaker in English, because you get to the TH and all of a sudden the tongue is out and down and the sounds are not there. So Mr. Beckett is going to talk to us a little bit about, as you progress about learning the single sound to a bunch of sounds to sounds that may or may not make sense. So tell us about it.
This is where the fun comes in. I say more fun because when the kids really enjoy doing the vowel charts and the chanting, it's sort of like singing for them. The tongue twisters are designed for actors, and actors use them all over the world. We use tongue twisters to help us work out the pronunciation and enunciation of whatever language we're speaking. On my board, I would have maybe charts of maybe 8 tongue twisters. And I would introduce at the very beginning maybe 1 or 2 tongue twisters at a time. Depending on where my students come from, I can figure out which consonant and vowel sounds are more problematic. So right now in Newcomer Academy, we have a very large Latin community.
Mm-hmm.
So the TH sound is really hard for them to produce because it's not in their language. So I would work on them, teaching them how to make that th, the TH sound, th, where the tongue is in between the teeth, th. So I would give them this tongue twister. I thought of thinking of thanking you. You got it? I thought of thinking of thanking you. And at this point, I'm not concerned about whether they understand what they're saying.
Right.
It's all about the sound. Can they hear the th and the t in thought? Thought. Okay. Do they hear I? Do they hear thinking, the k sound
in the middle?
Thinking?
Right.
So, and this all goes back to our vowel chart. Ka, ke, ki, ko, ku.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's all relates.
Ah, okay.
It all relates.
What is it?
I thought of thinking of thanking you.
I thought of thinking of things. Do you ever use mirrors?
No, I don't. Because I want them to tune their ears and understand and get the feel of the language in their articulators. I thought of thinking you. So I would begin with the whole class repeating it. I thought of thanking you. Doing it slow at first, of course. And then I would ask for volunteers in the class to say it out loud themselves, and we would listen. I would have the class listen to see if you can hear all of the things that we've been talking about. The TH sound, the T, the K, the I. Okay? And so they would pronounce it. I thought they would stand up proudly. I thought of thanking you. And so, I mean, everyone, we laugh at it because we recognize that student missed the th. They said, I thought of thanking you. So everyone can recognize that. And so then we all try it together, okay? So I'll give them feedback is also something that we do in theater. You always get feedback from the group of people that you're working with, not just from the director. And so we go through another student and another student. And as we move along, the entire class is willing to stand up or say out loud these tongue twisters. And I have tons of them that I have the students go through.
Okay, give us another one.
Okay. Here's the funny part. I messed up myself, so I do exactly what you saw me do. Okay. She sells seashells by the seashore.
She sells
seashells by the seashore.
Okay. Got it.
All right. 9 nimble noblemen nibbling nuts. 9 nimble noblemen nibbling nuts.
That's easier for me to say.
That's easier for you to say? Okay. How can a clam cram in a clean cream can?
Cram in a clean cram.
See, there's the fun.
Okay. Yeah.
And so as I'm listening to them, and when I'm doing this, I am constantly moving around the classroom. I make sure I've stood by every student by the time we work through these tongue twisters, and I remember which tongue twisters are more difficult for which students, and which students are moving forward. So I always give them encouragement. I always recognize, you did that. You said that TH sound. That is incredible. You're getting better. Can you hear it? Can you hear it? And sometimes it's yes.
Yeah. So in progression, you start with the single sound, build to groups of sounds, which we call words, and then, okay. So as you go along, how do you move towards fluency in speech and production and listening and things like that?
Well, there's another step in this. As the students become more familiar with the tongue twisters, I then help them figure out what the words are actually saying, what the words mean. So we find out what words they do not recognize and know in the tongue twisters, and then there's a lesson where we learn that vocabulary. Then we move to the longer tongue twisters, which that's where you have to understand what you're saying in order for the terms, the whole tongue twister to make sense.
Okay.
And I brought an example. It's by Betty Botter. It's about Betty Botter.
Okay.
So, I need to hold this up because I have to read this. Betty Botter bought some butter, but she said, "This butter's bitter. If I put it in my batter, it will make my batter bitter. But a bit of better butter, better than this bitter butter, will make my bitter batter better." So she bought a bit of better butter, better than the bitter butter, and made her bitter batter better.
So when we were practicing this, and I see that there's a question coming in, so we'll get to that in a second. But when we were practicing this, I read this to Calvin, and I want you to listen to the difference, how he just read it, and hear how I read it. Betty Well, except that I could barely see it. Betty bought some butter, but she said this butter's bitter. If I put it in my batter, it will make my batter bitter. But a bit of better butter than this bitter butter will make my bitter batter better. Oh, great, I'm doing a great job. So she bought a bit of better butter, better than the bitter butter, and made her bitter batter better. So I spoke it like it should be spoken. You didn't.
Yes.
Why, and why do you teach your kids that, and why is that important?
Because I want them to hear the beginning and endings of the words. A lot of times when they're listening to native speakers, 3 or 4 words get jammed together. And I want them to hear the consonants and the vowel sounds and how they work together. And what I've learned is this process helps them break down the language that they're hearing better.
So you're doing preventative work and not post, follow-up reparations.
Well, they taught me that. I learned from them. As I started beginning to create this curriculum, I started to learn from them, and they were bringing this information back to me.
So then, in a classroom, what would you do? Would you record the kids? Would you have them stand up in front of other kids? Would you do it as a group exercise or a turn and talk? How would you get them to do this? And then how would you understand when they're doing it the way you want it done?
Well, again, we begin with a group, and then it goes down to individuals. I just simply ask for volunteers. Who would like to say this out loud? And it ends up, hands started raising, so I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so the entire class gets an opportunity to say these tongue twisters themselves. My more advanced students, the goal then becomes, can you say this in one breath?
Ooh.
That's the challenge. To take a deep breath and say the entire tongue twister in one breath. Now, Betty Barter would not be one that I would do in one breath. But the next one, Theophilus the Thistle Sifter, can be done in one breath.
Okay.
And that's the TH sound.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be, Theophilus the Thistle Sifter, while sifting a sieve full of unsifted thistles, thrust 3,000 thistles through the thick of his thumb.
Okay, well, I'm not going to go there.
So, and I have several of those in class. So again, these aren't the only ones that we work with. But again, in theater, you're moving toward performance. So these are just simply exercises that I use, and then we can then move to do actual dialogues. So I created dialogues for my students based on their English language development.
Okay, so the 30-minute sign came up, so we've got about 20 minutes or so. And we just heard from someone in Honduras, and so we're going to look at as you progress through your work, how some other theater strategies are useful in an ESL classroom. And I brought in a favorite book. This is a classic American children's book. Most all the time when American literature for children is classic, it'll either have a gold or a silver seal on it. And this particular one comes from my city, Boston, called Make Way for Ducklings. And what the story boils down is that Mr. and Mrs. Mallard, which is a kind of a duck, are looking for a place to raise their children. And they have a choice of whether to do it in the country. They don't want to do it in the country because wild animals will eat the eggs. So they fly into Boston, and they're checking out all different parts of the city, and they're seeing what place may be suitable for them to raise their children. And of course, you can't do it in the city because there are bikes and trucks and cars and all sorts of things. So they then settle on the river, an island in the middle of the Charles River, which is a very famous and important river that divides Boston and Cambridge. They in fact have a clutch of eggs. The eggs are hatched and they raise them. And almost everywhere in the United States, this book is read, actually up until 6th and 7th grade. It's a very well regarded story for read alouds. And one of the things that we're going to talk to Mr. Beckett about today is the use of readers' theater, read aloud, creating dialogues, using authentic literature now, which becomes back parallel more to a traditional ESL classroom, but with the theater twist to it, because there's some really interesting things that you can do. And so I'm gonna ask Mr. Beckett to talk a little bit about puppetry. And as you see, we brought some puppets, and we're going to use those to just show you how you can bring all this together using theater in an ESL classroom, using classic literature, which is really one of the best ways to use to read to kids. So talk to us some more.
All right, so let me break it down a little more of what actually happens in the classroom with these dialogues. So I create dialogues based on what the students need to know. So our first dialogues are just simply dialogues that talk about, hi, how are you? Just introductions to each other, saying goodbye. So anyone can create those types of dialogues, so situations in which that happen naturally in a student's daily life. I have dialogues about asking for homework, asking questions in class, so I create those dialogues. The puppets come in.
Hold on. You mean asking questions in class is not a normal activity?
No. It is a normal activity, but for a non-English speaker, it needs to be practiced. So my class is where they can actually practice saying in several different ways how to ask a question.
And interestingly, in a lot of cultures around the world, questions are not welcome. And in American education and in English classrooms, we would hope to develop those skills.
And one of the differences I learned is that in those other countries, the students are passive. And then when they come to America, the teachers are constantly saying, what do you know? Tell me what you think. Always in their face, asking them to respond directly to what they're saying. They don't have the language for that.
Oh.
So I give them that language.
You mean bowing your head and sort of looking like, I don't know? Is that acceptable?
It's not acceptable in America.
Okay.
It's not acceptable in America. So what I do is I created a puppet theater, a puppet stage in which, and I did it specifically for my very beginning teachers. And my very beginning students, I'm sorry. So a way that they can hide behind the puppet and speak.
Okay, so in line with this, someone just sent a question. What books can preschoolers use when you read to kids? Mm-hmm. I can answer that, and then we'll ask Mr. Beckett to expand on it. As long as it's authentic literature, because what you're trying to do is get children to listen and hear what you're talking about. And yes, those books you can find online.
Absolutely.
The U.S. Department of State has a fantastic website that you can go to, where it has both audio and books in text that you can use with your classes. So the question may be more appropriately put that it's not the age level of the child, but the comprehension level of the listener, along with the age level of the child. So as you're looking for books, you can go to Amazon, you can go to the U.S. Department of State, and they have American English and just tons and tons. And there are also some guides that help you decide, because oftentimes in the back of a book, you'll see appropriate for ages 4 to 8, or appropriate for preteens or something. So use those things and learn how to judge what books become appropriate for you.
And if you're focused on reading and writing, you want the classic literature.
Right.
If you're focused on speaking and listening, it's because you want to pronounce the words clearly. You want them to be able to speak clearly and understand what they're talking about.
Okay.
It's sort of like I would take my students out, find out that their reading level is maybe 8th grade. I would then pick a 6th or 5th grade text for them to read aloud. And yes, I would record them reading aloud. And then after they've learned all that I'm teaching them about how to speak clearly, all of those different areas that we would talk about, we would listen to it ourselves reading these texts aloud.
Oh, okay.
And actually give each other a grade. So the entire class would listen to each student read their selection out loud from the recording and grade based on the categories that we talked about.
So in a rubric format.
And in a rubric format,
Okay.
the categories that we talked
Okay.
about. So they become their own experts in speaking and listening.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I find that really important because you do need to be your own expert. Because from my own experience when I was learning Spanish, and I listened to music and I listened to the television, and I'd start off knowing one word out of every 40, and slowly but surely, as I both produced and listened, I was able to get it. Okay, great.
And then with classic literature, you can turn it into a dialogue by pulling out dialogue from the text that you're using and create a script in which the characters are there and what the characters say is also there, and it matches up with what is in the classic literature itself.
Mr. Beckett just so happened to have written such a script. So we're going to take 2 minutes, and we're going to combine dialogue with puppetry. And these are my very famous, if not infamous, sock puppets. They're cheap, the cheapest thing that you could imagine bringing into a classroom. And I'll have Mr. Beckett talk about the power and use of a puppet in a minute. But all you have to do is tell your kids to bring in clean old socks, and they all have markers, and you can go to any 5 and dime, Éxito, any big store and buy these styrofoam balls. You can get like 1,000 for 50 cents. And then old mops, old pieces of fabric, and this happens to be an old balloon, and you got a sock puppet. Well, our sock puppets are going to be Mr. and Mrs. Mallard. And Mr. and Mrs. Mallard have now settled down, and she's laid 8 eggs. So Mr. Beckett and I are going to read this dialogue and then talk about it. And if you have questions or comments, just get them back to us now while we're doing this, as you see. Listen to the way Mr. Beckett reads versus the way I read. I'm Mr. Mallard, and you can tell because I have short hair, and Mrs. Mallard has the long hair. That's the big distinguisher.
And in theater, what you would actually have, you'd have a board or something. The kids would be down below the table, where the puppets will be above the table speaking. So that for the beginner student, the audience cannot see the person talking. They only see the puppet. So it's a little different.
Okay, and we'll read maybe half of this. Okay. I'm Mr. Mallard. Will you be able to visit Michael today for lunch?
No, I must stay to sit on my 8 eggs to keep them warm.
Okay, but will you be bored?
No, I will leave the nest to eat lunch or get a drink of water, and when I return, I will count the eggs to make sure they are all there.
You are a good mother. I'll be back soon. Goodbye.
Wait, the eggs are beginning to hatch.
I'm so excited. I'll give each one of them a name, And as they greet us,
Well, here they come.
hello, Jack. Hi, Cack. Hey there, Whack.
Come to mommy, my babies.
Hello, Mac. Hi, Mac. Hey there, Quack.
Yes, that's right. Come to mommy.
So you get the point here, right? And really little children, my students make paper masks. They are useful for shy students.
Absolutely.
You bet. You absolutely are so right on. So, Mr. Beckett, why puppets? Why dialogues? Why literature? Help us fill in the rest of this.
Oh, as you can see, it alleviates the fear of speaking aloud.
I don't see that.
You don't see it?
No.
Well, it's fun. And you're in a class of 15, 20 students, everyone's enjoying themselves. In theater, it's okay to make a mistake. You're practicing. You're practicing for a performance. So it's all right to try to do something harder than what you normally would, because you're not being graded on that. Nothing's going to affect you negatively.
But I'm your shyest student. I have rarely spoken in class, and so then I put this on. What happened? Why? What's going on here?
Because what I learned is, with my sci students, as soon as they put the puppet on, they disappear.
What do you mean?
It's not about them. The focus is on the puppet and not the person.
Oh, so I sort of become Mr. Mallard?
You become Mr. Mallard.
Oh, okay.
And the audience is not looking at you. They're looking at the puppet.
Right. I mean, this is what they care about.
Right. So when in the regular class, it would be the student standing up with the book in front of all of their classmates, trying to read it out loud.
Which is deaf.
Which is frightening for a beginner student.
And one of our viewers said that she makes paper masks. Make paper masks.
Perfect.
Make paper plate masks. Color your hand. Put crayon on your hand. Anything that makes it not you speaking is a puppet.
Create dialogues based on what the students will do naturally in the world. That's the easiest thing to do if you can't do it from the literature. How do you go to the grocery store and ask for change, for example? That's a dialogue. How do you call your friend to ask your friend if she or he has your science book and where to meet you? All of that is natural language. You have to learn your address. You have to learn the types of books. So everything, all the language that they're learning all of the words that they're learning in their English classes or their regular classes, you can pull all of that in. A dialogue, returning from home, talking to a parent or talking to a grandparent about what they did in the world or what they do in the world, is a dialogue. And they don't have to be long.
So this could go from Mr. Mallard to Grandma?
To Grandma.
Okay, well then we'll have to change your hair. Okay, so who writes the dialogues? How is it?
In the beginning, I wrote all my own dialogue, especially when I was trying to focus on what the kids are needed to learn in the real world that they were in Boston. And then what I found is I could use scripts, published scripts. So you can find them online. You can find little plays.
Free?
A lot of them are free, yes.
Okay. So folks, go online. How do you do it?
You put in a topic or put in scripts for 5th grade or scripts about ducks, and they'll come up.
Okay. So one of the things that might be important for us to do is to follow up on helping people understand that you can find this stuff. You don't have to write it. And you could probably find even audio recordings of scripts available.
You can. Of every story you can think of, there's a recording of it on iTunes.
On iTunes?
On iTunes.
How about free?
That might not be free, but you can find it.
But if you check American English, you might be able to find that. So we're getting down here now towards the end. We've got close to 50 minutes, so I think we've got to have about 5 more minutes to wrap up.
Okay.
So what we should do is think about how we can help people in their classrooms do this. Okay, remembering that we've got limited resources, we've got classes that are often 35 to 40 and upward kids. And teachers don't have tons of money to run out and buy books on Amazon, but there are resources that exist. And to me, this is the classic one.
And Dr. Johnson, I use paper bag puppets, which are cheaper.
Okay, paper bag puppets. So go to the grocery store, find paper bags, and how does it work?
You just draw on the paper bags, and you work it this way.
Okay, so your hand goes in that fold, and it becomes the paper. It becomes the puppet. So it's even cheaper. Okay.
Yes.
So you've got resources for making puppets. You can use almost any English grammar website for long and short sounds, all that other stuff.
And tongue twisters, you just look up tongue twisters, and you will get a million tongue twisters.
All right. So is there a secret to using them, or do you just pick the ones you like? Does it matter?
A lot of them are based on consonant and vowel sounds. So see if you can find sounds that your students need to work on, and then collect them that way.
Okay.
Like the TH sound or the B sound, as opposed to the V sound. Find tongue twisters that way.
Okay.
And put them together. And I think for teachers trying to use it, don't be afraid. It's fun.
Laugh right along with them.
If you make a mistake, you make a mistake. You tell the students what the mistake was, and they will enjoy the class even more.
Okay. All right. We have another question. What advanced grammar books do you recommend? Well, I don't have titles to recommend to you, but English grammar is English grammar. It depends on what your goals as a teacher is. Many teachers need to go back and reteach the vowel sounds, the alphabet, as well as the diphthongs, blends, and things. So you might be better when you look for advanced grammar to look for elementary grammar, because elementary grammar is what the kids have not learned. Oftentimes, we assume that, for example, here, you learn the Spanish alphabet. Well, that doesn't mean you know the English alphabet. So think more about your using elementary grammar books, because that will teach you the structures, the sounds, all of the rules for speaking English and pronunciation, etc. So I think that's real important.
And I go to the elementary level because the explanations are clearer, and it's an explanation that the students can hold on to and use as they become better writers.
Absolutely, right. Because what we know about language learning is when you learn your first language, you learn those rules. You learn all the rules, and then you promptly forget them because as you've used them, you've learned how to implement the rule. Well, that's not true in an ESL classroom because no one's ever taught you that A can say more than just A. It can be long, it can be short, it can be blended, it can be modified by adding an E or a vowel, consonant, and so all of those things should be considered. Okay, with 5 minutes left, I was wondering if folks out there had questions, and we've seemed to be exhausting our time, but the last page that Mr. Beckett put in was some theater resources for you. So if we could jump to that screen. Mr. Beckett, do you want your
I do, but in a different way.
What does that mean?
It's not about how it's not about them becoming actors. It's about them becoming speakers of English and having them comfortable speaking English and comfortable figuring out how they need to speak English better, the things that they need to do.
Okay, we have theater resources up. Do you want to say anything about
So the first one is the 101 theater games. So that's all sorts of theater games to bring in community into your classroom, to take out the fear of people watching you. And also there'll be tongue twisters in that as well. 33 short comedy plays for teens, plays for small casts. I use those with my more advanced students, in which they actually do little mini plays that are about 3 minutes long of 2, 3, and 4 characters. And these are all about things that happen in regular life. Folk tales on stage, these are readers theater pieces, which have very large numbers of people. So one play could be done for the entire class.
Say a little bit more about readers theater for folks, because they may not be aware of what that is and how it can be used in a classroom. And be also aware that the clock is...
Readers theater is acting with your voice. So instead of worrying about the costumes and the physicality of it, it's all about your voice. Changing your voice to create a character, changing your voice to create emotion. That's what readers theater is about.
Which is really good from the beginning, as Mr. Beckett talked about, when you're just doing single sounds and blends and short sounds and things, but you're headed towards things like readers theater. Mm-hmm. So there's a logical flow here.
Absolutely.
Okay, got a couple more to go.
The last one is the Puppet Mania. They tell you how to create different types of puppets. They'll tell you step by step how to create a sock puppet, step by step how to create the felt puppet, paper bag puppet, all sorts of puppets.
So we've tried to walk you through a quick and dirty using theater and thinking about theater. And so as you think about theater in your classroom, think about its application in terms of listening and speaking. And we know from our research that 70% of classroom time all over the world, this is world research, this is just not national research, says that 70% of the time teachers are talking, so the kids are sitting there. Well, they're not going to learn English if they just sit there. So Mr. Beckett's given us some ideas on how to get the kids up and involved, and I assume that they can stand up and move around, and we didn't even get into movement and things, but as I talked with him, he talked about the importance of that too. But we wanted to focus on listening and speaking here because of how important that is in an English classroom. On the very last slide is my email address, and I am more than happy to forward any questions or concerns to Mr. Beckett. And why didn't we put his email there? I don't know. But we'll field those questions for you. And if you need more websites, my first would be AmericanEnglish.com or .org, I don't remember. Google anything you want. Traditional American English is really, really important to use. I want to thank Mr. Beckett for traveling all the way from the United States to be with us. It was a pleasure to have you here today. Thanks for sharing your expertise. I hope you get to enjoy some more of Colombia, and to be in touch with us. It was a pleasure. Thanks.
Same here. Thank you very much.
Okay.